When Denise Welch looked directly into Meghan Markle's eyes and spoke the truths no former royal ever wants to hear, Meghan's reaction created one of the most shameful moments in Loose Women history. The Loose Women studio buzzed with its characteristic blend of nervous energy and anticipation. The iconic set, with its vibrant purple and orange color scheme, had witnessed countless dramatic moments over the years, but today felt different. The production team moved with unusual urgency, and even the most seasoned crew members could sense that this interview might venture into uncharted territory. Denise Welch sat at the famous panel desk, reviewing her notes with the focused intensity that had made her one of British television's most formidable personalities. As a veteran of both acting and television presenting, she had developed an instinct for recognizing when someone was trying to manipulate a narrative. Her reputation for asking uncomfortable questions and refusing to accept polished PR responses had made her both beloved and feared in equal measure. Ruth Langsford occupied her usual position as anchor, her professional demeanor masking the slight apprehension she felt about today's guest. The booking had been contentious from the start, with Meghan's team insisting on specific parameters for the discussion and certain topics being declared off-limits. But Ruth knew that once the cameras started rolling, the natural dynamics of live television could override any pre-arranged agreements. Colleen Nolan and Janet Streetporter completed the panel, both seasoned professionals who understood that Loose Women's format thrived on authentic reactions and unscripted moments. The show's success had always depended on its hosts' willingness to ask the questions that other programs wouldn't dare approach, and today promised to test that philosophy to its limits. At precisely 11:30 a.m., a black Range Rover with heavily tinted windows pulled up to the ITV studios in London. Meghan Markle emerged wearing an elegant navy blue blazer over a cream silk blouse, her appearance carefully calculated to project both sophistication and accessibility. Her smile was confident as she waved to the small crowd of photographers who had gathered despite the early hour, but those who looked closely might have noticed a slight tension around her eyes. Her security detail was notably extensive for a daytime television appearance, consisting of 4 plainclothes officers who seemed more concerned with controlling the narrative than actual physical protection. This level of security suggested either genuine concern about public reception or a desire to project an image of continued importance and relevance. The Green Room provided a temporary sanctuary from the controlled chaos of television production. Meghan sat in a comfortable armchair, sipping herbal tea while her publicist hovered nearby with a tablet full of talking points and approved responses. They had spent hours preparing for this appearance, crafting answers that would reinforce her image as a victim of circumstance rather than an active participant in the controversies that had defined her post-royal career. 10 minutes to air, a production assistant announced, and Meghan felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that accompanied live television. She had done dozens of these interviews by now, but British television was different from its American counterpart. The hosts were more direct, less concerned with maintaining artificial politeness, and far more willing to challenge guests who seemed to be evading difficult questions. Her phone buzzed with an encouraging text from Harry, reminding her to stay positive and focused on their shared mission of truth-telling. The message brought a slight smile to her face, reinforcing her confidence that this interview would follow the same pattern as her recent American appearances. Sympathetic questions, respectful treatment, and another opportunity to control the narrative surrounding her family's departure from royal life. The walk from the Green Room to the studio felt longer than usual, perhaps because she was acutely aware that she was returning to the country where her public image had first begun to unravel. British television audiences were notoriously skeptical, and the media landscape that had once seemed so eager to embrace her had turned decidedly hostile in recent years. Ruth Langsford stood to greet her first, her handshake warm but professional. "Meghan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you back on British television." "Thank you for having me, Ruth," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that carefully modulated tone she had perfected, confident but not arrogant, warm but not overly familiar. "It's lovely to be here with such accomplished women." Colleen and Janet offered their own greetings, each maintaining the kind of professional courtesy that masked their true feelings about their guest. But when Denise Welch stood to shake hands, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Her grip was firm, her smile polite but not particularly warm, and her eyes carried a sharpness that suggested she was already calculating angles of approach. "Meghan," Denise said, her Geordie accent lending an edge to even this simple greeting. "Looking forward to our chat." "Likewise," Meghan replied, though something in Denise's tone made her internal warning systems activate slightly. The pre-interview small talk continued for several minutes, discussions about the weather, the studio's recent renovations, and how good it was to see her again. But beneath the surface pleasantries, professional instincts were already at work. Denise had noticed something in Meghan's demeanor that struck her as performative rather than genuine, a quality of calculated vulnerability that immediately raised her suspicions. 30 seconds to live, the floor director announced, and everyone took their positions around the iconic desk. Meghan settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs and placing her hands in her lap in that distinctly royal posture she had never quite abandoned. Her latest children's book sat prominently on the desk in front of her, positioned at the perfect angle to catch the studio lights. The red recording lights blinked on, and suddenly they were broadcasting live to millions of homes across the UK. "Good afternoon, and welcome to Loose Women," Ruth began with her characteristic warmth and authority. "We're delighted to be joined today by Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, who's here to talk about her beautiful new children's book and her ongoing charitable work." "Meghan, welcome back to Britain." "Thank you so much, Ruth. It's wonderful to be here," Meghan replied, her smile bright and camera-ready. "I've missed being able to connect with British audiences directly." Colleen leaned forward with interest. "This book is really lovely, Meghan. It's all about finding your voice and speaking your truth. That must resonate with you personally, given everything you've been through." It was exactly the kind of sympathetic opening she had hoped for, and Meghan's response flowed smoothly. She spoke eloquently about the importance of empowering children to express themselves authentically, about how her own journey had taught her the value of honest communication, and about her hope that young readers would find inspiration in the story's message. For the first 12 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as her team had planned. The questions were gentle, focused on the book and her charitable endeavors. Meghan felt herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of a promotional interview, her confidence growing with each successfully navigated topic. But then Denise Welch's voice cut through the comfortable atmosphere with characteristic directness. "Meghan," she said, her tone carrying none of the deferential warmth that had characterized the previous questions, "I have to ask you something that I think a lot of our viewers are wondering about." The slight edge in Denise's voice made Meghan's posture stiffen almost imperceptibly, though she maintained her composed exterior. "Of course, Denise. What's on your mind?" Denise leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Meghan's with unwavering intensity. "You talk a lot about speaking your truth and being authentic, but I have to say, some of us here in Britain feel like the truth you're telling now is very different from the truth you were telling when you were actually living here. How do you explain that?" The question landed with the force of a physical blow, and Meghan's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment before her media training kicked in. "I think people evolve, Denise. I think experiences shape us, and sometimes it takes time to fully understand what you've been through." "But that's just it," Denise continued, her voice carrying the relentless quality that had made her reputation in British television. "We're not talking about evolution, we're talking about complete contradiction. When you were here, you spoke about how grateful you were, how welcomed you felt, how excited you were to serve. Now you're telling a completely different story. Which version should we believe?" The studio seemed to grow quieter, though the ambient noise level hadn't actually changed. The other panelists exchanged glances, recognizing that Denise was taking the interview into territory that could prove explosive. Meghan's hands, which had been resting casually in her lap, began to fidget with her wedding ring. "I think both can be true," Meghan replied carefully. "I was grateful for many things, but that doesn't mean there weren't also significant challenges that I wasn't comfortable discussing at the time." Denise's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Come off it, Meghan. You can't have it both ways. Either you were happy and grateful, or you were miserable and mistreated. You can't retrospectively rewrite your own experiences just because it suits your current narrative." Meghan's composure was beginning to crack in ways that were subtle but unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. Her breathing had become slightly more shallow, and her voice carried a defensive edge that hadn't been there moments before. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation," she said, though her tone suggested she was struggling to maintain control of the conversation. "Am I?" Denise shot back, her Geordie directness cutting through any pretense of politeness. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty simple. You came here, you were given everything: title, platform, resources, global attention, and when it didn't work out exactly how you wanted, you decided to burn it all down and play the victim." The words hit Meghan like a series of precision strikes. Her face flushed red, and for a moment she seemed genuinely speechless. When she finally found her voice, it carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. "That's not, you don't understand what it was really like. The pressure, the isolation, the way certain family members treated me." "Certain family members?" Denise interrupted, her voice rising with incredulity. "You mean the family that welcomed you with open arms? The family that spent millions on your wedding? The family that gave you a global platform to champion any cause you wanted? Those family members?" Ruth attempted to intervene, sensing that the interview was spiraling beyond normal parameters. "Perhaps we should." "No, let her answer," Denise said firmly, her gaze never leaving Meghan's face. "I want to understand how someone can be so ungrateful for opportunities that millions of people would die for." Meghan's eyes began to fill with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of rage and humiliation. "Ungrateful? I gave everything to that family. I tried so hard to fit in, to do the right thing, to serve." "For 18 months, Denise cut her off mercilessly. "You served for 18 months, Meghan. My nan served fish and chips for longer than you served the crown. And then you ran away the moment things got challenging." The comparison drew audible gasps from the studio audience, and even the other panelists looked shocked at the brutality of Denise's assessment. But Denise wasn't finished. "And now you're here, promoting another book, making more money off the story of how hard done by you were. Don't you see the irony in that? You claim you wanted privacy, but you won't stop talking. You claim you were silenced, but you've got Netflix deals and podcast contracts. You claim you were mistreated, but you're profiting from every supposed slight." Something inside Meghan completely snapped. Her careful composure abandoned her entirely as she leaned forward aggressively, her voice rising to nearly a shout. "How dare you sit there and judge me? You have no idea what I went through. You have no idea what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, your every word twisted." Denise didn't flinch at Meghan's aggressive posture. If anything, the emotional outburst seemed to energize her. "Every word twisted? Like the word racist? Like claiming your son was denied a title that he was never entitled to? Like suggesting the family questioned his skin color when we all know that's not what happened? You don't know what happened." Meghan screamed, tears now streaming down her face. "You weren't there. None of you were there." "You're right," Denise replied, her voice calm and deadly. "I wasn't there. But I was here, watching you. I was here when you arrived full of smiles and promises. I was here when you gave speeches about how honored you were to serve. And I was here when you decided that wasn't enough and you wanted to cash in instead." Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the studio floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent space. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara, and her carefully styled hair was now disheveled from her emotional breakdown. "This interview is over," she declared, her voice breaking on every word. "I came here in good faith, and you've ambushed me with lies and attacks." Denise remained seated, looking up at Meghan with an expression that was part satisfaction, part genuine concern. "The only person lying here is you, love, and deep down, you know it. How dare you?" Meghan's voice had risen to a near shriek. "How dare you question my truth, my experiences, my pain? Because your truth keeps changing." Denise fired back, her own voice rising now. "Because your experiences seem to get worse every time you tell them. Because your pain is making you millions of pounds." Meghan grabbed her purse from the floor beside her chair, her movements jerky and uncoordinated in her emotional state. "I don't have to listen to this. I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who's jealous of everything I've achieved." Denise's laugh was harsh and genuine. "Jealous? Of what? Of someone who threw away the chance of a lifetime because it required actual work? Of someone who's made a career out of playing the victim? You're having a laugh." As Meghan turned to leave, Denise delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire interview. "Meghan," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the studio, "the next time you want to play the victim, make sure you pick a country where people don't remember who you used to be. Because we remember, love. We remember exactly who you were before you decided it wasn't enough." Meghan stopped dead in her tracks, her entire body trembling with barely contained fury. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around and physically confront Denise. Instead, she pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle what sounded like a sob and ran toward the exit. Her heels clicked frantically against the studio floor as she fled, the sound amplifying in the oppressive silence that had fallen over the entire space. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind a quiet so complete that even the production crew seemed to have stopped breathing. For several long moments, nobody moved. Denise sat calmly at the panel desk, her expression composed despite having just delivered one of the most devastating takedowns in British television history. The other panelists remained frozen, each processing what had just occurred in their own way. Finally, Ruth found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Well, that was certainly unexpected." Denise straightened her jacket and smoothed down her hair, showing no signs of regret for what had just transpired. Someone needed to say it. If she can't handle basic questions about her own contradictions, maybe she shouldn't be writing books about them. Janet Street Porter, who had remained largely silent during the confrontation, finally spoke up. "That was brutal, Denise. Even by our standards." "Truth usually is," Denise replied without a trace of apology. "But that doesn't make it less necessary." As the show cut to commercial, the four women sat in contemplative silence. They had all witnessed dramatic moments before, but this felt different. This felt like the complete exposure of a carefully constructed public persona in real time. The remainder of the show proceeded with forced normalcy, but everyone knew that nothing could overshadow what had just occurred. Phone lines were already lighting up with viewer reactions, social media was exploding with clips and commentary, and news outlets were scrambling to cover the story. Meanwhile, somewhere in the ITV building, Meghan Markle was probably locked in a bathroom, trying to repair her makeup and compose herself enough to face the inevitable photographers waiting outside. Her security team was likely coordinating an exit strategy that would minimize further embarrassment, while her publicist fielded frantic phone calls from concerned associates. But the damage was irreversible. In less than 20 minutes, one of British television's most fearless personalities had systematically dismantled years of carefully managed public relations work. She had exposed the fundamental contradictions in Meghan's narrative, questioned her motives, and reduced her to tears on live television. Whether you agreed with Denise's methods or not, one thing was undeniable: she had asked the questions that millions of British viewers had been thinking but that no one else had dared to voice. Her refusal to be intimidated by celebrity status or royal connections had created a moment of television that would be remembered and analyzed for years to come. The truth, as Denise had suggested, was indeed often brutal. But sometimes, brutal honesty was exactly what a situation required, especially when dealing with someone who had built a career on carefully managed half-truths and strategic victim narratives. In those 20 minutes, British television had witnessed the complete deconstruction of a modern celebrity's attempts to control public perception through emotional manipulation. And the architect of that deconstruction had been a working-class woman from Newcastle who understood that accountability doesn't recognize titles, celebrity status, or claims of victimhood. The message was clear: in Britain, at least, you couldn't rewrite history just because the original version no longer served your purposes. And when someone tried to do exactly that, there would always be people like Denise Welch ready to remind them, and everyone watching, of what the truth actually looked like.